chaos, authoritarianism, violence, and the end of the U.S. Constitutional republic. Sorry to be so blunt, but it's not going to go well for us if he's elected again.
Let's talk to Rick Wilson, who's a Republican strategist and author of Everything Trump Touches Dies. Good evening to you, Rick.
Good evening. How are you tonight? Thanks for having me on.
I'm very well and great to have you with us. Let me just ask you, first of all, what you make of those remarks from Donald Trump in his victory speech there. He sounded rather as though he was threatening Nikki Haley with some sort of investigation.
I don't think it sounded that way. I think it was explicitly that, and this really is a part of both the autocratic personality Trump is increasingly displaying in our politics in the U.S., but also a an emergence inside of the Republican and the MAGA Republican Party that that intimidation and bullying and threats are perfectly acceptable parts of the political dialogue. Look, American politics has always been sort of rough and tumble, but now it's reached the point where you have a former president explicitly threatening a competitor with investigations if she stays in the race. It's astounding. It's mob tactics, not American politics.
It does seem, though, to be working for Donald Trump, doesn't it? Because, I mean, he appears to be on course to get that Republican nomination. It seems to be just a question of time before he gets it. And he's then, at the moment, in a lot of those key polls in the key swing states, seems to be leading Joe Biden as well.
Well, we've had some recent polling that reflects a little more on Donald Trump's increasing instability and incoherence in a place like Pennsylvania, where we now see Joe Biden leading Donald Trump by 9 points in a poll from the Susquehanna pollsters yesterday. Um, but look, he was always going to win this nomination. This was never going to. There was never any doubt in the minds of folks like myself, because we understand the anthropology and the culture of the Republican Party as it exists today. Nikki Haley could never make a critique of Donald Trump of any merit or significance because she would lose 60% of the Republican base the minute she opened her mouth. And so she tried to edge her way around the problem. And at the end of the day, it just didn't work. It wasn't going to work for Ron DeSantis, who had all the money in the world. It wasn't going to work for Nikki, who has a fairly distinguished record as a leader. None of them can critique Trump because the base worships him as if he were a god, and they don't accept criticism. They're not looking for an ideological change because Trump is post ideological. He is a spectacle, he is a transgressor, and that's what they want in the Republican base. And so it makes him unbeatable inside the base. But increasingly, we are seeing, just as we saw last night, Nikki Haley took 7 in 10 independent voters in New Hampshire. If that plays out in the fall for next year, Donald Trump will get blown out.
And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But first, on Nikki Haley, do you think it is a matter of time before she has to concede defeat?
Well, she's going to go into her home state of South Carolina. Our polling averages right now show he's got about a 30-point lead in South Carolina. I don't know how she makes up 30 points with $4 million in the bank in 30 days. It's very difficult to do. And if she does somehow survive South Carolina, she then goes into the Super Tuesday states, which include Texas and California. Donald Trump is leading her in California right now by 61 points. He is leading her in Texas right now by 55 points. I don't see a pathway where Nikki Haley, unless she finds a platinum meteorite and becomes the wealthiest person on earth, has a path to go into those states with the resources and the time she needs to build up a meaningful campaign, to communicate a competitive message, and to beat Trump. It's just a matter of the clock and the calendar don't play in her favor. And in fact, you saw today Ronna McDaniel, the chairman of the Republican Party, telling Nikki Haley, "Time to unify behind Trump. Move on, get out." So it's a very stupendously steep hill to climb.
We've seen this phenomenon, which is extraordinary to witness from the UK, whereby every time Donald Trump appears in court, which is pretty regularly, it seems as though it only helps his prospects. Is there
Yes.
anything in those myriad of court cases which are all continuing, all going through their process? Can any of them actually stop him?
I don't think any of the individual cases can stop Donald Trump. I think that the documents case in Florida is in a very bad district. It's a very red area. Hard to pull a good jury in that area. The Atlanta case with Fannie Willis is pretty strong, but it is not going to put him in jail or even indict him at this, or excuse me, even convict him at this point before the November elections. The New York case, the fraud cases in New York, those have had a little bit of an impact with some independent voters. The E. Jean Carroll rape case, where he's adjudicated to be an actual rapist in New York, has moved some women voters, but they're not Republicans; they're independents and soft Republicans. And finally, the Jack Smith case in DC, which is the most dangerous case for Trump in terms of the legal implications and in terms of the criminal exposure, is moving on. But once he's the Republican nominee, the Department of Justice's policy is going to kick in, and there will be a clock running on that case where the Attorney General, no matter what the criminality of Trump's behavior on that day was, no matter what the significance of that day was, the Attorney General will say to Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, time's up. Sorry, nice try.
Given what we've seen in terms of those very personal attacks on Nikki Haley as we go through this Republican campaign, if, as seems pretty much inevitable, Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, what do you think we can expect when he goes head to head again with Joe Biden?
You can expect the most hideous negative campaign in the history of world politics, not American politics. Donald Trump has to get elected to the presidency to stay out of jail. Donald Trump has nothing to lose, no boundaries, no guide rails, no nothing. We are going to find that the Democratic Party had better be ready for a battle royal. They'd better be ready for knives out day one, when Donald Trump is once again the nominee and they're fighting this out head to head. The negative campaign is going to be something that no one has ever seen before.
And you were saying that you thought that in some of the polling and some of the results we've seen, perhaps Donald Trump would find it harder actually to defeat Joe Biden if we do see that kind of negative campaigning. I mean, I know you're a Republican strategist, but how do you think Joe Biden is going to respond to that? I mean, is he up for this fight? Someone who, of course, his age is
Yeah,
already a big factor.
I do think that Joe Biden is. There's one distinction about Joe Biden that people tend to forget. As of today, Donald Trump has beaten in the 2016, 2020, and 2024 race 23 separate Republican candidates for for the nomination. Only one man has ever beaten Donald Trump, and that's Joe Biden. And Biden has two big factors going on here that are somewhat external to his campaign. The first is the economy in the US is improving markedly. It is improving rapidly. The economic attacks on Joe Biden are now in the face of record job creation, record wage growth, record pensions being funded because the stock market is up again. This is a booming economy right now. And while it has taken a long time to shake off the doldrums of COVID, by the time we're into the spring and summer of this year, Joe Biden's economy will be seen as one of the best possible, political calling cards that you could imagine. I will also say this: um, Donald Trump is a walking negative advertisement against Donald Trump. We're going to increasingly see Trump, as he's been doing today, the threatening, the outrageous behavior, the threats of authoritarian vengeance. But we're also seeing that Donald Trump he's lost a step. This is a guy who is not the campaigner he was in 2016 or 2020. He's out there confusing Nikki Haley with Nancy Pelosi. He's slurring his words. He's engaged in speeches that are basically incoherent. And it's one thing back in the day where Trump tweeted "Kofevi" and people thought it was a joke. Now he's mumbling and stumbling his way through these speeches, and he sounds insane. So I think that's one of the things that Biden will have an asset on, and certainly outside group like mine, the Lincoln Project, we will be pushing on that particular message valence very hard.
So, I mean, are these two men who both seem to have problems remaining completely coherent? Do you think they're actually going to go head to head in presidential debates? Are we going to see presidential debates later this year?
I suspect we will not. I'm beginning to believe that Trump will not do a debate, in part because Joe Biden beat him in the three debates of 2020, and he did not like that. That was not a good experience for Trump. And I also think that Trump knows he's lost a step. It's one thing for him to do the sort of shuck and jive act he does at his rallies, but it's another thing to go into a structured, formal debate where actual reporters will be posing questions to each man, and where they will be asking them difficult things that require cognition and felicity of mind to answer effectively and to communicate. I don't think Trump has that anymore. I think he's lost a step on that.
And if Donald Trump does win another term in the White House, a big question, and we haven't got a huge amount of time left. But what do you think we should expect from a Trump presidency Mark II?
Chaos, authoritarianism, violence, and the end of the U.S. Constitutional republic. Sorry to be so blunt, but it's not going to go well for us if he's elected again,
Rick
or the
Wilson.
world.
Rick Wilson, Republican strategist, author of Everything Trump Touches Dies. So good to speak to you. Thanks so much for joining us
Thank you.
tonight.
Anytime.